One of the most hated character archetypes in fiction is the Mary Sue or girlboss, a sister trope that often overlaps. I thought it would be interesting to talk about how I avoided creating a Mary Sue while writing a protagonist that could take on every human and animal that has ever lived and win 100% of the time. If you've been living under a rock for the past few decades, Mary Sues are typically seen as female characters who aren't punished for their flaws or weaknesses. They are universally liked, despite having a bland or prickly personality. If they are hated or suffer, it will be solely to emphasize their victimhood or the hater's villainy, never born as a consequence of their choices or mistakes. They are often extremely lucky or so overpowered and talented nothing plot-relevant poses a threat to them. They also tend to be reactive characters, may display hypocrisy, and are framed as being unreasonably attractive for no reason. Girl bosses share that lack of accountability for their weaknesses or flaws, extreme talent or unlimited strength, hypocrisy, and sometimes apex beauty. Often they also exist as a clumsy vehicle to promote feminist ideals that tends to actually cast feminism in a negative light. There is also a variant of the Mary Sue trope for men, but still, a heroine that strong, she definitely checks many of those boxes, right? Well, she's going to hit another one soon. It's important to note a character that has one of these traits isn't already a Mary Sue. The issue arises when a character sweeps all or most of these traits. So how am I threading the needle? Let's get into that. The biggest one is the genre for this project doesn't really allow for Mary Sues or girl bosses. I'm writing a comedy with light horror elements. The thing with comedy is it roasts everybody for their flaws. It's not as much about winning fights. Horror also doesn't work that well when a character is too broken, especially more actiony light horror like in Castlevania or My Story. But she is broken, right? Well, while it is true she could take on every army in history, she's among the weakest characters in the story. Meet Remy, a runaway succubus that completely sucked at being a succubus. She's everything a succubus shouldn't be, gentle, anxious, and prudish with very little confidence. So by necessity, nothing in the physical world can even harm her. As a succubus, she can influence how she is perceived, especially in the eyes of men. Flight, super speed, super strength, she has it all. She might even be able to beat Superman on paper. I don't know if he has some obscure anti-spirit powers. And yet, her remarkable sucking makes her the worst at all of these. All of those powers' effectiveness is tied to her confidence and emotional state. If her emotions and fears take control of her, she can barely function. It might take her years to take down every person who has ever lived, but she'd eventually do it. However, you match her up against a demon or fellow succubus, and her odds aren't so good. And yeah, her core physical conflicts aren't usually with the squishy, harmless humans. Of course, as a succubus, she also takes the peak of beauty trait. I told you she'd check one more box. That is literally what a succubus is, though. That's the unchangeable core to the species. So it kind of doesn't even actually apply. She's not exceptionally attractive for her kind or anything. Not being able to charm half of humanity is a pretty big limiter too. Remy has flaws and weaknesses, and has to grow from them if she wants to remain free. That's probably the most damning trait for a Mary Sue. Nobody likes a character who never has to grow or develop. If your character doesn't develop, people will consider them some negative archetype. At best, flat. Since Remy's powers are intrinsically tied to her mental state, she has to grow or she won't be able to fight off the devil or anybody else who comes to retrieve her. Beyond that, she, like other succubi and incubi, are naive to much of human culture and love. She's extremely awkward, especially early on. She's also a bit greedy and not easily satisfied. Of course, neither was her mother. Then, as a succubus, Remy is playful and likes emotional and mental stimulation. So she is rarely too reactive. She is more than capable of creating messes and complicating her situation. If she can eke out a win against some metaphysical opponent, it doesn't really even become a question until she has undergone personal growth. Remy develops a girlish rivalry with a human girl named Mariana, who comes closer to being a Mary Sue. I describe her perfection in an extremely long, repetitive, borderline mocking sentence. Don't worry, it's a lone, long sentence, not a norm. Everybody loves Mariana. She's rich, popular, and appears perfect. In any other story, she might be an obnoxious Mary Sue protagonist. But she's not as perfect as she looks. Her perfection is more of a heavy mask she wears. And she also gets punished hard whenever any of her personality flaws manifest. Plus, she might actually have some good points she hides while trying to fit the role everybody has for her. Both girls have a pronounced duality to their ability and supposed perfection. So that is pretty much all of the points usually thrown at Mary Sue's or girl bosses, and how I'm trying to avoid them. Are there any characters you've written or seen who come close to a negative archetype like this, but manage to not fall into it?